Representative Lucy McBath delivered a forceful critique of H.R. 6260, highlighting the bill's disproportionate impact on low-income Americans and community-based bail programs. Speaking on January 8th, McBath framed the discussion in the broader context of public safety, economic hardship, and systemic injustice, calling attention to the human consequences of pretrial detention and the overreach of federal legislation.
Really, I hope that the world is appalled at this administration's blatant and egregious culture of sadistic violence towards the American people. And today we're talking about keeping violent offenders off of our street. I hope that the world isn't looking at America thinking that our law enforcement and ICE agents themselves are not violent offenders. But I do digress. I want to talk about the bill as our colleague from New Jersey has expressed. Let's talk about the bill. As Americans struggle to afford groceries, fill their gas tanks, save their family farms, or find jobs that pay a livable wage, this committee is focusing on weaponizing the federal government against bail funds and strengthening the for-profit bail bond industry. H.R. 6260 is yet another example of misguided, unnecessary federal meddling into policies that should be left to the states by the so-called party of states' rights that does nothing to promote public safety. And while this bill is aimed at discouraging or even destroying bail funds, any organization that posts monetary bail, criminal bonds, or federal immigration bail bonds would be subject to the federal insurance fraud statute. That's not just bail funds that would be subject to criminal liability. That's churches, faith groups, nonprofits, and any other community organizations that pool financial resources to protect people from a system that punishes poverty, destabilizes families, and oftentimes coerces guilty pleas. Mr. Chairman, sometimes the most effective tools for justice are local, nimble, and born from the communities that they serve. H.R. 6260 is aimed directly at those very tools, which often serve as a lifeline for thousands of low-income Americans, leaving only a potential windfall for the for-profit commercial bail industry. Proponents of this bill have previously claimed that bail funds operate in the shadows and that their donations come with little to no scrutiny. That is simply untrue. For example, the Bail Project, a 501c3 organization, is subject to regular monitoring and oversight by the IRS. Adding additional nonsensical layers of bureaucracy will not make our community safer, but it will make it harder for organizations like the Bail Project to help people in need. And let's be real, most of them are people of low income, poor people. There are nearly 500,000 people across the country in pretrial detention, meaning they're sitting in jail, who have not been convicted of a crime because they cannot afford to pay for their freedom. Without the help of organizations willing to help by providing free bail assistance, whether designated as a bail fund, church, or other nonprofit, people who cannot afford bail might languish in jail for weeks, months, or even years while they're waiting for trial. They can lose their jobs, their homes, their medical coverage, access to medical care or medication, or even custody of their children. I, too, want to keep violent offenders off the street. Everyone in this chamber wants to keep violent offenders off the street, but this bill will not do that. H.R. 6220 will punish Americans before a conviction is even determined. A charge is not a conviction, meaning there is no determination of guilt. Yet this bill will keep charged Americans jobless. It will keep charged Americans homeless. It will keep charged Americans in poverty. And it has the potential to leave the children of charged, not convicted Americans parentless. I oppose this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. And I yield the balance of my time.
Representative Lucy McBath's remarks provide a searing critique of H.R. 6260 and its broader implications for justice, equity, and community safety in the United States. She frames her argument around the central tension between public safety and systemic inequity, highlighting that this legislation, under the guise of keeping violent offenders off the streets, would instead punish Americans before they have even been convicted of a crime. By doing so, H.R. 6260 risks criminalizing poverty and destabilizing families, while simultaneously creating a potential windfall for the for-profit bail industry, illustrating the misalignment between the bill's stated goals and its real-world consequences. McBath emphasizes that almost 500,000 people in pretrial detention nationwide remain incarcerated solely because they cannot afford bail. These are not hardened criminals. These are people whose freedom is denied due to economic circumstances. This stark reality underscores that H.R. 6260 is not simply a legal matter. It is a moral and social crisis that disproportionately harms low-income Americans, minority communities, and families already struggling to survive. McBath meticulously dissects the logic and scope of the bill, noting that its reach extends far beyond conventional bail funds to include any organization posting monetary bail, criminal bonds, or federal immigration bonds. This would encompass churches, faith-based groups, nonprofits, and community organizations that mobilize resources to support individuals trapped by an inequitable system. By imposing liability under the federal insurance fraud statute, H.R. 6260 threatens to criminalize acts of charity and community solidarity, further weakening the very social structures that historically mitigate systemic injustice. McBath's example of the Bail Project, a 501c3 nonprofit, illustrates her point clearly. These organizations operate under strict IRS oversight and transparency standards, proving that community-led initiatives are accountable and effective. Additional federal micromanagement is unnecessary and punitive, serving only to make it harder for low-income Americans to access justice. Beyond the technical aspects of the bill, McBath situates H.R. 6260 within a broader socio-political context. She contrasts the committee's focus on regulating bail funds with the everyday struggles of American families trying to afford groceries, fuel, housing, and health care. By weaponizing federal authority against local community organizations, she argues, Congress is turning its attention away from solutions that would genuinely enhance public safety and social stability. McBath emphasizes that people in pretrial detention face cascading consequences: job loss, eviction, loss of medical coverage, interrupted education, and even the potential of losing custody of their children. These outcomes illustrate how punitive pretrial policies can destabilize entire communities while failing to address the root causes of crime. Crucially, McBath underscores that public safety cannot be achieved through punitive measures alone. She stresses that violent offenders must indeed be removed from the streets, but effective public safety strategies are rooted in evidence-based approaches such as community-led interventions, drug treatment programs, and support for law enforcement that strengthens investigative capacity and protects vulnerable communities. H.R. 6260, she contends, fails to align with these principles. By punishing Americans preemptively, the bill undermines justice and fairness while doing little to enhance real-world public safety outcomes. McBath's argument is further strengthened by her insistence that the law must differentiate between individuals who pose legitimate threats and those who are detained due to systemic inequities. Finally, McBath frames her opposition in terms of equity, accountability, and human dignity. She challenges the committee to recognize that the law should protect the most vulnerable rather than criminalize them. By highlighting how H.R. 6260 disproportionately impacts low-income Americans, McBath calls on Congress to choose policies that uphold justice, safeguard families, and strengthen rather than weaken community-based solutions. Her remarks remind us that fairness in the justice system is not optional, and that elected officials bear a moral and constitutional responsibility to ensure that laws protect citizens rather than punish poverty. In her view, H.R. 6260 represents a clear misstep in this responsibility, and voting against it is not merely a policy choice. It is a defense of human dignity, social justice, and equitable access to the protections of the law. The speech stands as a powerful call to lawmakers to center humanity and fairness in legislative decision-making and to prioritize solutions that keep communities safe while respecting the fundamental rights of all Americans.